So it looks like we're ready to roll. So folks, we're going to get started with a roundtable conversation now. If you're in the space, you're more than welcome to have a seat and listen in. Otherwise, continue doing what you're doing. You're not disturbing anyone. It's all good. Perhaps I'll now officially say bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue, welcome everyone online and in person to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thanks so much for joining us for today's panel discussion on needlework and women's communities of craft. We are joined by artists and participants in the research creation showcase that's part of the homemaking project activated all week here at Fourth Space. We are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands here in Jargay, Montreal. And we'd like to extend our gratitude to the Kanyankahawga Nation, who are the caretakers for the lands and waters we're meeting on, for their teachings about the earth and our relations. At Fourth Space, if you're new to this operation, online or in person, once again, welcome. I'll tell you a little bit about what we do here. We work with our community of faculty, students, and staff across Concordia University to help activate the ongoing research projects and various university initiatives with the goal of really co-creating knowledge and building community around the work that's coming out of the university. And we do this by producing daily hybrid events and activities such as this one that are free and open to all. So welcome in once again. Make yourselves comfortable, folks. Feel free to find a seat, grab a chair and move it where you feel most comfortable in terms of viewing capacity. I know that you'll be invited to join the folks at the table as well if you wish to do so. Perhaps I'll just say that if you're joining us in person and you'd like to jump into the conversation, we've left 2 handheld mics there on the table that we can pass around. They're already turned on, so if you'd just like to speak and you're not at the table, let us know by raising your hand and we'll get one of those mics to you so that the people on Zoom can hear you. And those of you on Zoom, well, you're more than welcome to turn on your cameras and of course, speak to us via audio. Otherwise, we'll keep our eyes on the chat and read out any comments that are made in that space for everyone to hear. So I'll stop by saying that it's been our pleasure this week to collaborate with the organizers and participants of the homemaking project. And it's my understanding that this roundtable should be fairly short, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and then you're invited the rest of the time to speak to the artists and speak to the research creation projects that are in development here and have a walkabout and a look around. Okay, that's it for me. I'll now pass the floor over to Elaine Patterson. Hi, Elaine.
Hi, Anna. Is this okay for the sound? People can hear me okay? Great, thank you. So hello, everybody. The front seats are available to you as well. Don't be shy. And we actually have seats around the table for real if you want to come up this far. But we can see how it goes with the conversation. So a big bonjour à tous. I'm Elaine Patterson. I'm a professor of craft studies in the Department of Art History here at Concordia in the Faculty of Fine Arts. And I'm with my colleague and collaborator, Molly-Claire Gillette, who is a colleague in the Interdisciplinary Studies and Practices area of the Faculty of Fine Arts here at Concordia as well. Nous sommes ravis de vous accueillir aujourd'hui à l'Université Concordia et aussi à Montréal pour le lancement du colloque Homemaking. So thank you for joining us for coffee and snacks, please, at the intersection of conversations around research and creation, craft and home, with the participants in the Homemaking Research Creation Showcase that is surrounding you today in the space for those of you who are here with us in person. As collaborators on the Homemaking Project, Molly-Claire and I are really, really pleased to welcome all of you here in the space with us, and those of you who are at a distance, particularly our 2 panelists today. So I'd like to begin, as Anna did, by acknowledging that this event's home, Concordia University, is located on stolen Indigenous lands. Molly-Claire and I recognize the tensions inherent in hosting a symposium, an event focused on home, when we ourselves are uninvited guests on the unceded lands of the Kanyankahawga Nation. We invite reflection, discussion, and action into this space of tension, and encourage those joining us virtually to learn and reflect on the land which you're attending this event from, and for those of you who are visiting from another place to do the same while you're with us. So Meet the Makers today is the culmination of installations that have been happening all through this week here in Fourth Space. As I say, you're surrounded by that work from the week past. We also had 4 workshops leading up to this event in the previous 2 weeks. And we're very thankful for the support of the Textiles and Materiality Cluster as well, who also hosted some of these workshops. And to those who are workshop leaders and the makers in residence for hosting those events for us. I also want to thank Fiona and Kathleen, who have been in the space every day this week, who have been bringing a wonderful craft energy and good work into the Fourth Space, just behind the screen here for those of you who are in person with us. And they've been here every day working, either teaching and making lace or working on a collective textile project. Kathleen has a whole gang of people with her, and others have joined in all through the week. So it's been really wonderful. So today's Meet the Makers then is meant to kick off the international symposium that is for the next 2 days following this one. Tomorrow's events will be here all day and then followed by Saturday in the library, which is just around the corner and upstairs from us all day. So we hope that you'll join us for some of those discussions as well. So as Anna said, Molly, Claire, and I will start today with about a half an hour or so discussion panel that's a hybrid with discussants who are looking at needlework and women's communities of craft from international panelists that Molly Claire will introduce to you in a moment. And we're so pleased to have been able to include you, even from afar, in the Research Creation Showcase. So thank you for that. And Molly Claire will then explain, I think, the format and introduce the panelists.
Before I do that, actually, I want to draw your attention to the really handy QR code on the back of the program. You can see in the back corner. And if you scan that QR code, you can find online the abstract and bios for everybody who's participating in the Research Creation Showcase, as well as in the symposium. So there's a lot more information online that you can find. And I also want to draw your attention to the work by remote participants. We have several people that are joining us from afar. That work is on the touch table beside Communal Catalan at the back of the room, and you can swipe through. It's been set up really well for us by the Fourth Space staff, and you can see the work that's been submitted by people who are participating remotely, including 2 of the panelists in this discussion. And now we invite you to come and join us for this conversation, followed by a Q&A. It'll be about half an hour, maybe a little longer if we have lots of questions from the audience. These things tend to go a little longer sometimes. If you're joining us on Zoom, you're welcome to put questions in the chat, and we'll take those questions as well. And for those of you who are here with us in person, you're welcome to get up, get a coffee, a treat from the table. For those of you who are participating in the Research Creation Showcase, you're also welcome to sit with us at the table. You're welcome to ask your own questions of the panelists. So if anybody's feeling brave enough to come and join us at the table, I won't call anyone out, but you're more than welcome to come up here and sit with us. Any takers for that? We'll see. Oh, I see Patrick's coming. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us, Patrick. We appreciate it. You're welcome to ask questions of the panelists as well. So joining us for the roundtable today are Rosa Borrás, Pragya Sharma, and Fiona Harrington. We have Rosa and Pragya here with us on Zoom. I see them over here. Maybe you see them somewhere else? Nope, over here. And Fiona is here with us in person. Rosa Borrás was born in Mexico City in 1963. She has a degree in graphics design from the Universitario Borrás in Puebla and studied painting at the Massachusetts College of Art. She's a multidisciplinary artist working in drawing, watercolor, printmaking, embroidery, and textile on subjects of identity, memory, gender, and human rights. She's a member of the Museum of Mexican Women Artists. Her work is in the Conflict Textiles Collection of Northern Ireland and the Center for Applied Human Rights at the University of York in England. She has published broadly and had 23 solo shows and 60 group shows, both in her country and abroad. So welcome, Rosa. Fiona Harrington, here on my left, is a visual artist who makes lace by hand. Her practice explores themes of domesticity, traditional women's work, cultural identity, memory, and loss. Fiona studied fine art at Crawford College of Art in Cork and began her career in painting. She's also trained at the Kenmare Lace and Design Centre, where she learned traditional Irish lace techniques, including Carrick-Macross and Kenmare needlepoint, some of which you can see at the front table if you want to wander over later. She then completed a degree in textile design at the National College of Art in Dublin and went on to develop an individual style of contemporary Irish lace, which has received awards including the Thomas Damon Bursary, the RDS Graduate Prize, and the Eleanor de la Branchadière Award for Innovation in Lace Design. So welcome, Fiona. Pragya Sharma is an independent research consultant, designer, and academic based out of New Delhi. Having previously worked as an academic in the Indian Institute of Art and Design, New Delhi, Pragya's research practice primarily engages with any aspect of domestic crafts in India, tracing their provenance and contemporary practices. She has written and presented papers at various national and international platforms on themes ranging from design history and textiles, zero waste design, design pedagogy, to Indian craft communities and practices. Alongside her practice as a scholar, Pragya runs a design practice, a small studio called Unpearl, where she designs and works with contemporary hand crochet. So welcome, Pragya. So Elaine and I will start by asking some questions to the group, and we'll see where the conversation goes. You three are welcome to ask questions to each other at any time. Patrick, you're welcome to ask questions. Anybody in the audience is as well. You can put up a hand and Elaine will bring the mic over to you. And again, for those of you who are on Zoom, I will be keeping an eye on the chat, and I think Anna will be helping me if I don't see, and we'll take your questions as well. Does that sound okay to all of you? Would you like to, Rosa and Pragya, maybe check your mics and make sure we can hear your voices in the space? Say hello.
Sure, hello. Nice to be here with you.
Hello.
Great, okay. Sounds like we can hear both of you. I have some images that I'll bring up on the screen as we hear you speak. So I'll ask the first question and then I'll get those images shared on the screen. The first question is, and maybe we'll start by asking Rosa, because I see we don't need an image. We have your beautiful pandemic quilt behind you. I wonder if you could tell us more about your engagement with needlework and community.
Yes, well, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I have been very interested in working collectively and with community for a long time. And I think mostly my work with community started around 2009 in two areas: feminism, with a piece that was commissioned in November 25th, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And I made a piece to put on a public space and interacted with the public. And then I made the first political embroidered piece I made was a quilt with the names of 49 children that died in a terrible fire. And there was no justice, and still there is no justice. And so I made this blanket and I took it to several demonstrations. And that was a way to engaging with the community and with the people that was in those marches and protests. But then in 2011, I started collaborating with Colectivo Fuentes Rojas and their project Bordando por la Paz, and we brought it to Puebla in 2012. And we used to embroider in public spaces, and that was a 100% community-based project. And then also I had been teaching, and that's another way of interacting with different groups, like students, art students, design students. And also, what else can I say? Well, just organizing different kinds of projects. Not all of them are embroidery projects, but I am also a cultural manager, so I make open studios and shows and different ways of bringing people together. My work recently, since, well, not so recently, for about 10 years, 11 years now, has been very political, and human rights are at the center of a lot of my work.
Thank you. I wonder, I'll repeat the question for you, Pragya, because just to make sure you have it, but can you tell us as well, in your practice, more about your engagement with needlework and community?
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for the question. I think a lot of the engagement is related to my studio practice. So essentially why we started the entire studio, me and my mother, was because we found a space for authentic, original, and something which is finely crafted, knitted and crochet products in India, because it's a domestic practice and you don't find it very much in public spaces. So our idea was to introduce these hand knitted and hand crochet pieces into the public arena. And so suddenly we had a number of orders which we couldn't fulfill between the two of us. And so I started looking for makers around my own area. And so I stumbled these scattered makers. Some were in Delhi, some were around suburbs, some were around these smaller villages within Delhi itself. And then I eventually ended up collaborating with an NGO who works with multiple makers. So that is where the entire journey of working with the community actually started. And gradually, very recently, I was asked to document crochet in Goa. So crochet in Goa is a widely practiced craft form, again in domestic spaces and not very much visible in the public spaces. So when I started that entire activity across the entire region of Goa, it was a mammoth task. It was not something which was achievable. But we managed to track people, and there were innumerable makers across the region itself. And the entire idea of interviewing them and hearing their stories within their domestic spaces where crochet can be found as an active element, it's an action. You can find it across tables, across furniture. It's like the entire house is decorated with crochet. So I think that just had a very different impact on my practice, because for me, it was very much a personal practice. It was very much something that I've seen at my house only. You don't see it, anywhere else in public spaces. So I think that's another community that eventually I started building and working with. So I think it's something that I'm still exploring, but over the years, the community has just expanded. Yeah.
Thank you. And I don't know if you can see that we've shared the screen on your end, but we've been showing some images of your work throughout, and I hope that you'll have some time as well to speak to these projects specifically. Fiona, what about you? Can you tell us more about your engagement with needlework and community?
Hi, everybody. Is that okay, sound-wise? Yeah. So as Molly-Claire mentioned, I started my career as a painter. So I've been working as a professional artist for the past 20 years. And for the past 10 years, I've been working specifically with lace. So for the first 10 years of my life as a painter, I just found that I was very much by myself. And while I knew other painters existed, I could never kind of meet them anywhere. And there never seemed to be any outlet to kind of join forces and collaborate. And when I started making lace, that was the one significant change that I noticed almost overnight. As soon as people heard that I made lace and that I was interested in stitch work, people seemed to want to talk to me. Doors opened. And the only thing I can think of is that stitching and textiles is so ubiquitous around the world. It's part of every single culture, and it's the one thing that everybody has in common. So if you're involved in stitch work and if you're involved in textile work, people are interested in what you do, and people want to talk to you, and people want to work with you. And this was definitely my experience. Ireland is a very small country with a very rich tradition of textile making. And since I started making textiles or lace specifically in 2012, I've worked with a number of different organizations and groups on various different projects. And some might be specifically to do with education work that I do, so not necessarily lace making, but just stitch projects that I've worked with community groups. And we've come together and presented those projects individually. And other groups I've worked with are specific lace making groups as well. So it just seems to be this connecting force, not just in Ireland, but right across the globe. And even I think this week has been a really strong testament to that since I've been here, since Monday. I've just been sitting at the table over here making lace, but pretty much ever since I've been here, I've been talking nonstop, because everybody just wants to chat and everybody has a story to tell, and everybody had a mother or a grandmother or an aunt or a neighbor who engaged in stitch work, and everybody has those memories. So we see time and time again how memory is so intertwined into textile work, and it's so personal and special to people. So that really is my connection with community and stitch work, and in particular for me, lace making.
That's a really good segue, because the next question that I wanted to ask is related to memory and related to history. You mentioned that Ireland is a small country with a long history of textile traditions, and I think that we could say that about, maybe not that it's small, but that it has a long history of textiles. That's true of India, that's true of Mexico, that's true of many of the countries that many of us are coming from. And so my next question, and after this I will pass the mic off, is can you tell us a little bit more about the history of women engaging in needlework in your region? And maybe tell us a little bit more about how your practice intersects with that history, as a way of maybe telling us a bit more about the work that we have here on the screen. I'm gonna go in the slides to whoever is next and see. Looks like it's you, Rosa, if you don't mind starting off with that question.
No, it's okay. It's very interesting. Mexico, as you said, has a great embroidery and weaving tradition in the indigenous communities. The telar de cintura, which is the waist loom, is very alive, very much alive. And we see textiles everywhere in Mexico, and embroidery and weavings, but we don't, it's generally not as valued as in any other countries or when it goes abroad, because it's made, first of all, by indigenous people. So there's a lot of racism still in Mexico. And it's considered like not art, right? But recently, the communities have been organizing in groups and in cooperatives and collectives to sell better their work at a fairer price. Sorry. So for me, the influence is, well, as you can see, I'm wearing a Mexican blouse. I love wearing these kind of clothes, but my main influence is more, let's say, European, because my family comes from Barcelona, all of my family. And so they came to Mexico after the Spanish Civil War. And my grandmother, both my grandmothers used to knit and to sew, and my grandmother on my father's side used to make lace, like with bobbins and like what Fiona makes. And my grandma on my mother's side was a dressmaker. So I learned from them, and especially from my Yaya Lola, which lived with us at our house. So for me, it's a very personal heritage, let's say. And this piece has a lot to do with community. And I think it shows pretty much what I feel. It's a very emotional piece. And this came as a result of a workshop I offered as a gift to a friend that owns a school. And the women in the parents, the mothers and caretakers during the confinement were really stressed, and the whole situation had changed all of a sudden with the confinement and the pandemic. So I offered this workshop and was directed towards these mothers and caretakers because I thought they could benefit from having a space and a time for themselves to just relax and to get together with other women that were also very surprised and tired and all these feelings and emotions. And the idea was for them to think about how they felt and to put a word to each feeling and embroider it. So we had a few sessions. And the first piece I made was the one that says paciencia, which is patience. And I made it with the intention of showing them or teaching them a special technique, coaching. But then as the workshop progressed, I realized that I needed also to put a word to the feelings I was having and to recognize how I was feeling. So I started making these blocks, these different panels. And the panels, I will tell you the words that I started to think and design, which is dolor, pain. I have a lot of chronic illnesses, and pain was a very, very strong at that time. So dolor, pain, amor, love, incertidumbre, uncertainty, paciencia, patience, aprensión, apprehensiveness, gratitud, gratitude, miedo, fear, and conciencia, awareness, and cercanía, distancia. And that was very important because although we were very far away, the fact of being connected through technology and remotely brought some closeness, even with these people that I didn't know, that I got to know through this workshop, and with family and with people that we couldn't be physically present, but we were connected through distance. And for this piece, I used clothes from my family and recycled materials. I use a lot of recycled materials in my work. I try to make sustainable work, and also some tie-dye that I had done several years ago. And so this is the piece. It's all hand sewn and hand embroidered. And the one on the corner that has that black rectangle says miedo, fear, and it's black over black. And so I think, I think you can see perhaps some influence of the environment I live in through the textiles of indigenous people, and it's mainly what I wear and what I use at home. But yeah, I think that my main influence was my grandmother.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've seen the theme of family and intergenerational connection come up again and again. I think especially, as you said, Fiona, in the conversations that you've had with people as they've come up to speak with you at the front. And these have been conversations I've heard in the past couple days in this space. I'm going to go to your images, Pragya, in a second, but I'll ask the question to you as well. Is there a history of women engaging in needlework in your region? And is your own practice connected to or influenced by that tradition? And I think you spoke to this already a little bit, but perhaps you could speak to it in relation to crochet domesticated specifically.
Yeah, I think I'll just start with like a brief introduction about needlework in India. And we all know we don't know where to start because India is known for its textiles worldwide, and there are like multiple types and techniques and embroidery styles and weaving styles which are famous globally. But I think women have always performed needlework at home. I think that has been a common strand throughout. And although we had a lot of village industries, so we had a lot of spinning and weaving happening at home, domestic crafts, which include knitting and crochet and needlework. By needlework, I mean English and Western needlework, is something which is very recent. It's something which is almost like a colonial import. So it came with the Britishers, it came with the Portuguese. The women that I work with in Goa, their crochet styles have a lot of Portuguese influences. So these were the different influences which were coming in, and that's how Indian women learned these techniques. And they are strongly related to the introduction of missionary education in India, because I work a lot with the histories of these crafts. So that's why my language will be more historical. But I'll quickly shift to how it is related to my own personal practice, in the sense, because I couldn't relate much to the village industries, because that's not something that I was closer to. It was more with what my mom and my grandmom were practicing at home. And these were the techniques of crochet and knitting that they have been continuously doing. My grandmother had a knitting business at home. So she had a domestic that flatbed knitting machine, and she used to create socks and caps and sweaters and sell it in the markets in North India. And everybody at home used to operate that machine, including men. So it was something that everybody used to do it just to make better use of the time. And that's why I'm more personally connected to these practices of knitting and crochet. And I have been wondering over the years that why these practices have a slightly different connotation compared to how traditional Indian crafts or the folk crafts are being treated. And I reflected, and it came out that because they're entirely rendered invisible even within the domestic spaces. So let's say if you have a crochet cover which is displayed on a TV, it's just acting as a covering, but the detail and how it has been worked upon, the labor that has gone into the making of the crochet cover has been rendered invisible. It's something that is considered every woman should know. It's considered the identity of, a good bride to be. It's something that women make as part of their trousseau. And the only pieces I inherited from my family were the ones my mom carried in her trousseau. So the entire invisibility really bothered me. And that's why this whole idea of crochet domesticated was conceived. So I identified these objects across the domestic environments and like various spaces in the house, which have direct correlation with women's work, something which has been labeled as purely a women's activity. And that includes washing, that includes, cooking tea at home, or that might include ironing clothes. So all of these activities I was trying to, juxtapose with crochet, because both of them have these invisibility factor to it in terms of labor and also the end product. So that's why I juxtaposed these two techniques and the various tasks or the various objects which identify as women's labor. So it was a nice brainstorming activity, because me and my friends, we kept on thinking, what are these things which are stereotypically labeled as women's work? And we came across with so many ideas. Most of them were related to kitchen and bathroom spaces, sadly, but that is how I came across these objects. And these are just 5 objects, but there are many more which can be conceived of. So I don't know if it's clearly visible, but these were the soap bubbles that I was trying to create with that hyperbolic type of crochet. And we call it tuna, and it's a fairly popular washing item. And it's something which is it's usually discarded in a corner inside the house. And when you put it with that crochet, it creates a very different kind of feeling, because something as decorative as that is being used to rub a surface. But that just questions that, how else crochet is being treated in the household spaces. So yeah.
Thank you. There's a really natural connection between your work and Fiona's work, because you mentioned a lot of the lace techniques being brought to India from Western contexts, and particularly through missionary activity in like the 19th and early 20th century. And a lot of these crochet motifs remind me a lot of the crochet motifs that I know from Ireland. And I know there's been a little bit of work that's been done on Irish nuns teaching crochet in India. So maybe we'll have to chat about that sometime. But I want to ask the same question to you, Fiona. Can you tell us more about the history of women engaging in needlework in your country or in your region, and how your practice intersects with this or is informed by this history?
So there's a very strong tradition of textile making in Ireland. So we would have been known for knitting, for spinning, for weaving, and of course for lace making. So there's 5 different styles of lace from Ireland, and they're all made in completely different ways. So you don't have to look very hard, but in practically every single town in Ireland, you will find some form of history of lace making in the town. It was really all over the country, and it was a very, very important industry. So at the turn of the 20th century, lace making was the 2nd largest industry in the country, employing thousands of women, and it was absolutely fundamental to the country's survival. After the famine of the 1840s, lace making, lots of time and money was really invested into developing lace making as an industry, because it was a skill that could be taught to women easily because the tools were inexpensive, and women were able to learn it, and therefore they were able to earn money to feed their families. So it was hugely important at that time, and there's lots and lots of stories of women at that time being the people who were going out and earning money and keeping their families alive rather than men. So in many ways, lace making gave women a huge sense of independence at a time when women didn't even have the right to vote. Also in the early 20th century, there was a lot of single women who were able to emigrate from Ireland, and this would have been very unheard of at the time, a single woman traveling by herself. And one of the reasons they were able to do this is because they were able to pay their fare using the money that they had earned from their lace making. So it was really, really, really important. And as I said, there's 5 styles of lace from the country. It was practiced everywhere. So practically in every family, there is some kind of history of lace making, or definitely some connection to some form of textile making. Oh, yeah.
And how has that history impacted or informed your own practice?
Okay, well, interestingly, I became interested in lace because of an art exhibition that I went to see in Birmingham called Lost in Lace. And what that exhibition did was kind of spark my interest in kind of the practice of lace making. But it also triggered a memory that my mother was a lace maker that I had totally forgotten. So she had made lace for all of our lives as children and made our communion dresses, etc. And this had just kind of exited my mind. So once I made that connection, and once I remembered that, I then kind of felt this obligation to continue that practice, and to continue that tradition, because it felt like it was a part of me. So I kind of felt like I had a responsibility to do that. Did I answer your question? Yeah, okay.
If there are questions from the audience, you're welcome to start thinking about them. You're welcome to put up your hand at this point. I know we have some other questions here at the table, but I'll just check the chat as well while you're thinking. I don't see any questions in the chat. Elaine, maybe I'll pass the mic to you for another question while people are thinking, unless there are some more in the audience. Do you have a question? Oh, your follow-up? Okay. Oh, yeah, we can use that to run around.
I'd also invite the panelists to ask each other questions. If you have anything that you'd like to talk to one another about, we don't need to be the ones who are the interlocutors the whole time, if that's something of interest. I guess I'm interested, and Rosa, you began to speak about this a little bit with your quilt, but if your experiences being a maker during the pandemic had any impact on your practice, and if you want to speak a little bit about that in terms of your needlework and whether that offered connection or comfort or other experiences during that time. So maybe I could ask you, Pragya, to start with that. Would that be?
Yes, I think in terms of I think the pandemic offered that period of time where you could actually reflect on your making practices. And I always feel that making is central to my identity, even if that identity is as an academic or as a researcher. I always have to be making something to just process the world around me. And so I think I explored new techniques during the pandemic. So I started working with pojagi, handmade pojagi, which is a Korean patchwork technique. So, which is again something which is meditative, which is something which requires a lot of time and patience. So, in a sense, it was matching up with the kind of time that pandemic offered, ample amount of time, ample amount of space, ample amount of peace. So, I think I started exploring more techniques like that. In terms of working with communities, I think that was a barrier, that was a physical barrier that I couldn't, come over, because in the sense, these communities around me, and because of strict lockdown conditions, I actually couldn't just go and work with them closely. So I think that barrier was there, but in a sense, it was liberating in a personal way, in a personal sort of experience. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting connections, or lack of connections in some ways, but also that introspection and time itself as sort of expanding and contracting through pandemic experiences. I see you nodding, Rosa. Would you like to interject?
No, just that it was very interesting to see how the confinement reflected or influenced our practices in different ways, and how it brought really an opportunity to make things in a different way. And I just wanted to say before I forget, although I wrote it down, I am very interested in what Fiona said about the connecting force of the textiles and the lace making and the stitching. I think you are very right, and I feel it every time I teach or I organize gatherings, whether it is in my country, in different cities here in my country or abroad. It's really amazing. And also the factor of the memory, the weight that memory has in this, and the weight of identity and what it means to us. And also I just wanted to say, Pragya, that those mopping things, the mopping textiles that, well, we use them also here in Mexico to mop the floors, and I recently embroidered a series of these mopping things with some words. I will send you some of pictures of that, and the connections that I think, because of the conquest, la conquista, the conquest we had in Mexico in the 16th century. We have also a lot of European influence, even in the community or the indigenous textiles, and how that gets transformed through time. And that's it. I shut up now.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that you're making those connections as well. So maybe I would hand it over to you, Fiona, to talk about the pandemic experience, if you like, or perhaps respond to what Rosa's just said, if you prefer.
Just the pandemic is in my mind right now, because I had just started my MA in October 2019, and in March 2020 we went into lockdown, so everything went online. But I kind of loved it. We had a very strict lockdown in Ireland, and we basically weren't allowed to leave the house, with the exception of being able to go for a walk within a 2-mile radius. So I suddenly found myself having all of this time. I wasn't allowed to leave the house. I wasn't able to go to work. I wasn't able to go to college. And lace making just takes and requires so much time, which I just never had up until that point. So I completed my entire MA project at home in my tiny little studio in the house. And I had all the time in the world to do it. So part of me kind of pines after the lockdown, just a small bit. Yeah.
We have a question from the chat here that I'll read, but before I do, it's almost 4 o'clock, and so we recognize that some of you might have to go at 4 o'clock or might want to stand up and move around a little bit. So for those of you who are here with us in person, you're welcome to stand up, get a coffee, get a treat. And if you want to, when you sit down at the table. You are welcome to do so. We'll continue the conversation a little bit though, because we do have some more questions. So feel free to move around though, if you're with us in the space. We have a question on the chat, from the chat. It's up here on the screen, and I'll also read it out loud. It's from Cordelia. I want to ask Pragya and Fiona how they experience the histories, and in particular, the colonial aspect of the techniques that they practice. Also, Rosa, can you speak more about your attachment to quilting? So thank you, Cordelia, for that question.
I can start with it. I think how I experience the history and the legacy is very different from how other people around me experience it. So I see it as a good legacy in the sense because it just offered women that sort of independence, like even what Fiona mentioned, in the sense that it's a skill at the end of the day, and it's something that women can use to make something, to earn something, to just evolve it the way they want to. So I think I see it as a good legacy, but there are people around me, and there are a lot of people who see it as something which is a negative Western influence, and that has got to do with modernity, in the sense when these skills were being taught, any woman who was seen to be practicing these kind of skills was considered to be imitating the British women, or something who is trying to be more modern. So I think that kind of influence still seeps through the modern society, and it's very hard to just eradicate it. But I think it differs, the opinions differs in terms of these colonial histories. But I also feel in terms of techniques, Indians have adapted these techniques to suit their own environments, to suit their own styles and tastes. In the sense, how we wear cardigans or how we wear socks is very different from how they were being worn in the West, or still are being worn. So I think those kind of techniques and silhouettes, they have been adapted to suit the Indian taste. Yeah.
Did you want to speak to the same question, Fiona?
Sure, yeah. So lace making in Ireland, I suppose, has a very colourful history. It kind of was born out of desperation and famine. And the famine in Ireland is very often likened to a genocide rather than a famine, which was a result of colonialism. So there's a very kind of checkered and troubled history there that we haven't quite come to terms with. And there's also a huge amount of trauma there that, again, we haven't fully dealt with after the famine of the 1840s. So it's probably a little bit difficult to talk about it. The lace-making industry was established by many philanthropists and religious orders, and both now we have come to realize, you know, there was an awful lot of trouble with both of those, and they caused quite a lot of pain and anguish in Ireland. But the fact remains that the process of lace making developed as a result of philanthropists and as a result of the religious orders who developed the schools. And I think the women of Ireland really kind of embraced the process and very much made it their own. And now it feels like it really belongs to the women of Ireland. And it's an industry and a process and a technique that they're very, very proud of. And that's very, very evident wherever you go in the country. So it's a very difficult kind of question to answer. There's so much wrapped up in it, and lace making is very much intertwined and wrapped up into the social and political context of Irish history, and it's impossible to just answer that. Yeah, sorry.
I think that the difficulty of answering the question is maybe mirrored in those two contexts, as well as this idea of women taking something and running with it, maybe taking something that was introduced in adverse circumstances and using it in the way that they see fit. I don't know, Pragya, if you want to speak back to Fiona about that, or if we'll ask Rosa about quilting. You're good.
I think Rosa can, yeah.
Sure. Okay. So Rosa, Cordelia is also asking you if you can speak more about your attachment to quilting specifically as a medium.
Yeah, sure. Well, my mother, my first contact with quilting was my mother made some quilts for our beds when I was little, and I loved them, and I used them until they were rags. But then in the 1988, my husband and I went to live to Boston, Massachusetts, and we lived there for 10 years. And there I got into contact with that kind of textile and textile making and all the history of quilting. And I started making quilts for my babies, for my daughter and my son. Those were the first quilts I made. And then I made a few for my friends who were having babies also. All of these in the US. Then we came back to Mexico, and I always incorporated this idea of putting pieces together of scrap materials. And recently, I started making quilts again out of the need of I think that just assembling all these unlike materials, pieces of clothes and fabric and all this idea of layers. And also I made a big blanket for the Center for Human Rights in York, in the York University. And that incorporated, it's a blanket for the defenders. No, it's a blanket to protect the human rights defenders. And it incorporated the clothes from some of my friends that are human rights defenders, Cordelia among them, to this quilt. And it has I think quilting has a very powerful voice. I think it can make statements, and it can make people feel protected, and also it can be like be very personal and intimate, but it can also be in a public space as a protest. So that's I don't know if I answered you, Cordelia.
It's interesting what you bring up, this idea of quilting being something that's personal and private, but also that can be visible in a public space and can have a public impact. Because I think the idea of visibility has come up in everybody's work, this idea of needlework being something that's often not visible, and how can I make needlework visible, and thinking about invisibility as something that can maybe also be a power of needlework that can lead to connection, lead to community, but also how maybe making needlework visible can be really powerful. And I wonder if, well, maybe the rest of us are thinking of more questions. If there's any audience questions, feel free to put your hand up. If any of you want to speak to that idea of visibility or invisibility when it comes to needlework.
I would like to say quickly about this invisibility against the visibility of the thing. I think the reason why all of this has been invisible, all these crafts and textile work and crochet and lace making to a certain degree, the practice of lace making, is because it's made mainly by women, and then it's very domestic. And everything that is domestic has no value, and it's taken for granted, maybe. And at least it is in Mexico. Most of this work now it's starting to have some importance in outside the home, but it has been invisible since the start. I think there was a question.
Yeah, I just want to add to Rosa's point. I think another aspect that contributes to the invisibility is the entire factor of portability, in the sense, especially with the techniques of crochet and knitting, because of the tools, because of the materials which are being used, they don't occupy that kind of space, let's say what a loom occupies, or something which is on a larger scale, which has a presence. So in the sense, the portability also influences the invisibility of these crafts in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Rosa there in terms of it being women's work. I think most textiles are women's work, and I think that largely contributes to why it never got the attention or the acknowledgement that these industries deserve.
And perhaps why too, also that can point to why sometimes textile work displayed publicly can be so powerful, because we're often not used to seeing that. I think this question, maybe we'll start with you, Fiona. There's a question from Marlene here, which is about your work, but also Marlene has connected this to everybody's work in a really interesting way. So the question is, can the panelists speak briefly to fragile economies, the title of one of Fiona's pieces? And perhaps also to the monetization of craft making and celebrity culture influences. Are you hopeful for the future, perhaps we could say future of craft, in your country? Would you like to speak to fragile economies first and tell us a little bit about why it's called that?
Sure. Okay, so that work was made as part of my MA project, and I was researching women's industry in Ireland, so lace making being one of them, and poultry keeping being another. So poultry keeping in Ireland was a big industry for women in the kind of 1900s up until around the 1970s. They were able to become quite professional as poultry keepers because they could become inspectors. So this was considered like a really good job. So I was interested in the idea of women's independence and how women were able to find their own independence through employment that they were able to generate and the industries that they were able to create. So that is why I created this artwork, which is 21 broken eggshells, which has a piece of needle lace specifically designed to the contour of the broken shell. So I always thought lace was a very fragile material to work with until I started working with eggshells. And you might see the one at the kind of foreground on the right, which is broken. That is because I dropped it while I was trying to attach the lace to it. But it still kind of added another quality, I think, to the work. So I was making this, as I mentioned, in my MA, and we went into lockdown, and then in the middle of this process, you know, the world shut down, the economies stopped, industry stopped, and the title kind of came to me. So it was about women's industry in the 20th century in Ireland, but it kind of became entwined into kind of what was happening currently then as well, and how fragile our world is and how fragile the world's economies are really. So that's what it's about.
In the couple of seconds that we have left, Rosa or Pragya, do you want to speak to that question that Marlene asked?
Well, maybe if just quickly, I will just answer the the last part. Are you hopeful for the future in your country? Well, it's hard to say. Of course, there is always hope. Otherwise, we wouldn't be creating, and we would just be paralyzed. But I think it's difficult. Craft making and art making are not considered to be essential in our country, and the policies are and the budgets are always being cut for education and arts. So from the government point of view, it's like we are non-existent, pretty much. But I think that in the little economies or small economies or small ways of making will prevail. So maybe I will say that there is hope if we change our ways of exchanging labor for not putting, how can I say, not making them like a commodity, but something essential for our soul and our daily living.
Yeah, I'll just answer the middle part of the question, which was the monetization of craft making. I think in my country, it's still at a very nascent stage when I talk about domestic crafts of crochet and knitting, because the kind of price that is being paid to something which is done so intricately is very, very dismal. So I think it's still at a very nascent stage. And I think it's time that we put a higher value to the craft so that, it receives a higher value. I think, yeah, that needs to be the driving force.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap up there. We went a little bit over time, but I didn't want to cut the conversation short because we had so many great questions coming from the chat. So thank you for your questions, and thank you for being here to speak with us. Pragya, we know it's very late at night, especially for you, so we really want to thank you for taking the time to be here with us, and Rosa and Fiona as well. Thank you so much. We're going to give you a round of applause in a second, but just before we do, I'd like to highlight something that Anna just said, that for those who are with us on Zoom, if you'd like to see the projects in the space, one of the cameras is going to move around and show you. So Rosa and Pragya, you'll be able to see what's going on in this space other than just this table here. But with that, everybody here, I invite you to give our panelists a round of applause.
Thank you.
So I would add my thanks as well, and I do hope you'll stick around, Rosa and Pragya, to see the tour virtually. And to everybody else in this space, I hope you'll wander and meet the makers who are here for the next hour or so. You're more than welcome to stay the whole time, and please partake of the food and drink as well so that we can celebrate together. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Elaine. And maybe I'll just add, folks, we appreciate your patience. We're going to have to set up another Zoom, get that going before we can move around the space. So just hang tight with us. That should only take a few minutes. And that way you'll get to experience a little bit of what's here. We'll do our best to make it a smooth kind of walkthrough of the space for you. So don't worry, we'll be back in a few minutes. Just hang tight. And thanks again, everyone. Rosa, can you hear us okay in the Zoom? Yep.
Yes.
Great. All right, here we are. Hi.
Wonderful. Hi there. Hi.
You're more than welcome to introduce yourself and speak to your work if you'd like for a few minutes.
Great. My name is Heather Kohlmeyer. I am a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and here we have my piece, Paper Dress. I am a paper maker at heart, but I'm also very interested in textiles, and I do a lot of sewing. So this piece was inspired by a little dress that my mother made for me from a bed sheet when I was a little girl, and she upcycled lace. I've with my interest and love of paper, I've been, just eager to combine that with sewing and textiles, and so I had this idea for this project of making this little lace paper dress. So since it was this sort of exploration of craft and paper, I decided that I wanted to use my grandmother's 50-year-old sewing machine. And though I usually spend most of my time working in a studio, I couldn't help myself. I ended up at the kitchen table. And as I was making this piece, I was really, I had my mother and my grandmother at heart, and I was thinking strongly about this idea of craft and textiles, and how so much of that historically has happened in the home, and though it's played an incredibly important role in our lives, it's oftentimes invisible. And so this idea of using paper, something that is an unconventional textile, can be formed into a textile, was really compelling to me. And what you might not be able to see here, but I can see, or you can see if you get up close, is that every stitch can be seen, not just in the thread that was used, but the whole. If you're working with traditional textiles and you're sewing and you make a mistake, you can take that stitch out generally, and you can just rub it out or wash it out. But you can't with paper. So this for me is really lovely and poetic because you really see the mark of the maker. You can't hide it. It's not invisible. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's so impressive.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Thank you.
And thanks so much for being here and bringing this project through Force Space. Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
We're well, how are you?
I'm great.
Would
What
you
a
like
great
to
event. Yes.
introduce yourself and
Hi.
tell us about your work?
Rebecca Strelick. I'm visiting from Pennsylvania, where I teach at Penn State Altoona. And I've brought a selection and representation from 365 grams, which is a recently completed series. For an entire year, 365 days, I wore one piece of my grandmother's costume jewelry. Every day, a new piece for a year to give it its last day in the sun before I dismantled it and repurposed it into contemporary jewelry. And so the pieces you see represent some of those things, including this neck piece here is, it's called Leave Behind, and it's basically the roof of a house, but it also includes some of my grandmother's pins that I've dismantled and kind of reset, a la a jeweler would do with precious gemstones, into this very large, very sculptural, domesticated garment, jewelry. And then I brought my Gram's desk. That's what I called my grandmother, Gram. And the desk is important because I knew I'd be getting it. The day I was born in 1977, my grandmother put a piece of masking tape underneath of it with my name on it. Her things were very important to her, and so she wanted them to be identified as to where they would go after she departed this earth. And the desk is in use, it's in my house. And my kids and I were having a dance party, and my daughter tripped and fell and broke the desk. And instead of taking it to a carpenter and repairing it, I made a brooch for the desk in the visible mending style. So this brooch covers the damage of this shard that fell off from the trim on the bottom of that shelf. And so I made a piece celebrating the brokenness, but also the new hole, and then the ornamentation found in the decoration of the desk. So the things that you see here are selections from a group of about 70 pieces. And then the last one, which is really fun, is in the box of jewelry was a set of my grandmother's dentures. I don't think they really belonged, but they were there nonetheless, so I had to treat them as jewel. So this piece is in celebration of the dentures that I hope she purposely put in the jewelry box, and they weren't lost, which would be very sad. So I'm I'm overjoyed to bring the work to the homemaking project. It seems like it's quite a perfect fit as we talk about where the things go after we celebrate them during our lives and how craft intertwines with that idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And maybe I'll mention also to our online audience who are actively listening, you're more than welcome to jump in with questions. I'm not sure if we'll hear you. It's kind of loud in here, but you can try. We can certainly try. We're going to swing the camera around here to welcome back into the space our workshop facilitators from earlier this week. Selena
Hello.
and May, welcome back.
Thanks, Anna.
Please introduce us to this project.
Well, just to start, my name is Selena, and this is...
Hi, I'm May.
And we collaborate a lot. We hosted a workshop series last summer called Mending Matters. And in that workshop series, it was just trying to bring craft to the community of Point St. Charles through the form of mending, but also thinking sustainably, and brought the Catalan weaving, which is repurposing textiles that are ripped and torn into making a new piece. This is a piece of Quebecois heritage, but also something you can see across Canada. So that's kind of the foundation. We brought a small table loom around the parks of Point St. Charles with Christine's help. Do you remember her last name?
Christine White from the Pedal Box Gallery was the person who rigged up a bike trailer to the back of her bike on which we installed the loom, and we biked around the neighborhood, stopping at parks and allowing visitors to try their hand at weaving, many of whom were doing it for the first time. So we lugged around all of these fabrics and tore them on the spot and taught people how to weave using these repurposed textiles. And something that came up during these workshops was how many memories people held of previous family members who they saw as a child weaving, maybe in their living room. Their grandmother would wake all their linens. So anyway, so many people seem to have memories of weaving, but in the past. So it was nice to revisit weaving in a contemporary context. This Catalan rag rug, we decided to install on a wooden frame that references the functions of a loom. So there's 2 crank handles. Looms typically only have 1, but the idea is to work together in order to move the piece back and forth by cranking it. So you can go in both directions, and it's nice as an interactive piece that requires more than 1 hand, just as the rag rug did. There was about 30 people or so who wove this rag rug, children and adults alike. And so it's nice to show it in this way.
So yeah, feel free to interact with this sculpture. It's meant to be touched.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was great to learn more about the work in this way, although I already had a little introduction to it. And folks, feel free to come and engage with all of the works that we're introducing here in the space. As we move along to Patrick's zone, I see Patrick here near me, so I will hand him the mic. Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes. Do you want to start?
What would you like me to talk about?
Well, just introduce us to who you are and your project.
Well, my name is Patrick Moskwa. I'm an architect and artist and educator out of Calgary, Alberta, on Mohkinstsis. And yeah, this body of work is looking at sort of the fragility of domestic life in my queer home. And yeah, I use a liquid latex product to make skins and casts of domestic objects that all hold a meaning and some type of memory for me, but are kind of open for everyone to embed themselves in, because we all have a candlestick. We've all engaged with light switches and things before. And so, yeah, I find them a little bit performative in a way. They're boisterous and fragile and delicate. Yeah, I don't really have too much else to say.
That's great. No, that's great, Patrick. Maybe you can, I don't know if folks can see, because we're not going to go around reading the labels necessarily, but maybe you can introduce us to some of the objects that are laid out here. I noticed that there's one in the window that we maybe haven't fully, I don't know if we can catch it with our cameras. It's just off of the light tables, but it's kind of one of the first objects that folks might encounter as they're walking into the library building here at Concordia University, where Force Space is located. And I've been noting that people have been stopping by and peering in the window with great interest at what they're looking at. Do you want to tell us about that piece?
Well, that piece was inspired by my partner. Inspired by my partner. He keeps pockets full of dental floss and leaves them all around the house, which was really quite frustrating when you're sitting on the sofa and you get this little pinch in your butt. And so I just sort of collected them. Like, well, how would this make me feel if I was, if someone else felt my frustration and irritation? And so I cast a toothbrush in latex and added human hair as the bristles, and kind of that imagination of pulling those through your teeth as though it was dental floss, and it's sticking in your mouth. Right? Yeah. Again, that uncomfort and frustration and sort of delicateness of the notions of home.
And tell us about this video that we're also seeing here as an accompaniment.
Oh, that's going to be difficult for Doug.
Difficult for us to see, maybe for the online audience, but there is also sound with it. We hear you kind of blowing into this decanter, I guess, or
so this piece was inspired by that whiskey decanter, and it was one of the first pieces in the series that I had made, and I wasn't quite content or happy with the physical object. Once I finished it, it was a little bit too stiff. And then I walked by it at one point and just picked it up and blew into it. And suddenly it took a new form and a new shape. And this sort of repetitive breathing is a really sort of gentle reminder that we take up space, especially me as a queer man, taking up a lot of space whenever I possibly can. And it does sort of resonate through the whole room if it's quiet. And just sort of the thought process of this tiny little whiskey decanter that is full of my breath that can consume an entire room without being seen.
Wonderful. And I had a great time reading the additional titles of the works that were added in after the fact, after they've been here for a few days. Yeah. And there was a little bit of spark of joy in reading all of these, because it kind of gave the work an extended meaning, if you will, or a way of engaging with it. So thank you for the care of putting those titles about and letting us into your story through this project.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Patrick. I'm not sure if we have someone else ready to talk to us nearby, but maybe if Kathleen is deep in conversation right now, but maybe if I can catch her, we could invite Kathleen Vaughn to say a few words. Can we? Yes? Okay, here you go. No problem. Oh, hi, Kathleen.
Hi, Anna. Hi.
Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about your project?
Yes, thank you. I'm Kathleen Vaughn, Professor of Art Education at Concordia University, and I'm here with a team of my research assistants and with anybody else who would like to join in a collaborative embroidery project related to the St. Lawrence River. It's part of a SSHRC-funded project I have exploring attitudes to and hopes for the river. From an environmental and a social perspective. So we're doing a lot of different things with eco-printing, with cyanotype, with natural dyes, where the plants that are beside the river use both the shapes of their bodies and the chemistry of their substance to add elements to our project, to try to showcase what the beautiful world can be and do. And people have been dropping by to embroider tiny bits of things or larger bits of things on the big frame. The piece that we have will end up being very large, will be a wall-sized work that includes stencils and images related to the St. Lawrence River's ecosystem, and of course our desire to keep the river healthy and well. So collaborative stitching is a way to bring people together to share stories, share techniques, and to learn and think together about the St. Lawrence River and other things, good foods and treats and, the kinds of things people talk about when they have a chance to chat together.
Well, I see also that you come equipped with complete guides to needlework, and the how-to kind of methodology of materials is laid out in your space. Does that mean that folks can come and participate in this moment with you without necessarily having had experience in this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Everybody is welcome, provided they're willing to hold a needle and thread and to give it a try. It's usually a skill that someone has had a chance to use, and if they haven't, we can demonstrate. So it's an opportunity to learn a little embroidery if you like, or just to freeform it. So we welcome that as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for bringing this collaborative project
interest.
through
Yeah,
Force
it's
Space.
great to be here.
Yeah.
We're loving it.
Awesome. Thank you. I think Doug's going to be able to pan across some of this work. We are headed to Fiona Station now. It might be a little bit difficult to navigate, and I'm going to have to beep. Sorry. There's a work in progress here in development. I'll see if Fiona, there she is, will speak to us. Of course, Fiona, who was just a participant in the panel, got to speak to her work, and we saw the slides, but now you get to see what she's been doing here in the window at Force Space all week long, very kind of visible onto the street. And perhaps we'll be able to adjust the camera to see some of the details of that work, but Fiona's currently engaged in displaying her method to an interested onlooker. So we won't interrupt that. But I will mic you as you're doing this explanation so that we can also hear it.
Okay, so I'm going to make another stitch now. So it's cross twist, working with 2 pairs of bobbins, so 4 bobbins in total. We've made half a stitch. We put the pin in, and then we need to finish the stitch by going cross twist and then tension. And there is 1 stitch. So at each point in the graph, that's where the pin goes.
Daydream when you do this? Or
No.
do you have to concentrate?
As soon as you daydream, you make a mistake, even if you've done it all of your life. Yeah, the crochet lace makers can sit on the couch and watch TV and make crochet lace, but yeah, I still haven't mastered that. Yeah.
So people never really get to that point where they can sort of input something.
No, actually, the European lace makers can do it. I've seen them. They're like having chats and making tea while they're making lace. Yeah. So, it is possible. I don't know if I would ever get to that stage. Yeah. Pardon?
As soon as I start thinking about something else, I can talk a little bit now when I'm on.
Yeah,
that's me as I work. But if I start thinking while I'm doing it,
Okay, there's a great conversation in progress, so we'll let it develop, and we'll move over here if you're okay to talk to us, Carrie Lynn. Okay, awesome. Well, please introduce yourself to the online folks and, or to the folks online, rather.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Carrie Lynn Reeves. I'm an artist, educator, mother. Currently living Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton, Alberta. And this is my work over here. It's a small selection of work from a larger sort of family work that I did when I was an artist in residence at Harcourt House, which is an artist-run center in Edmonton. So I started my year-long artist in residence position the day after my second baby turned 2 years old, or a year old, and the day that I returned to work, I also started the residency. So and it was all in the middle of the pandemic as well. So the project was really about sort of me figuring out that balance of motherhood, academic life, artistic life. It was a newly blended family that I was the mother and stepmother, or I am the mother and stepmother in. So also about those balances that were happening. I was also really thinking about ideas of care. You know, we were in these domestic spaces a lot during the pandemic, and they were spaces of comfort, care, safety, but for some, they were also full of dangers and tensions. And we were really made much more aware of our bodies in a new way through the pandemic. And I was doing a lot of research into trauma and difficult times and how that lives in your body and in your nervous system, and how that really needs to be healed through your body and your nervous system as well. So the series of work that I did was kind of all about that idea of comfort. So I did a series of 3 quilts. I did 3 different bodies of soft sculptures that could be rearranged in the gallery so that visitors could actually play with them, could rest on them, they could kind of customize them to their needs and their body, and they could sort of contemplate the rest of the work from there. And the rest of the work included a series of ceramics, which there's 366 ceramics. So one for every day of the year that I was in residence, plus one for the leap year, because that's my birthday. And everything in the exhibition was in series of 3s or 6s. So it just made sense that that also be 3 and 6. And my family is also a unit of 6. So it just sort of all made sense. And I'm not there was also some printmaking. Yeah, lots of different techniques. Like I'd never really done throwing on the wheel before. So that kind of became a learning process, but also sort of this idea of like a moving meditation and kind of seeing what the body of clay could do with my body of knowledge and emotions, and where they could kind of interact and collaborate. Yeah. And then just kind of like working with color as sort of a form of therapy in a way, but also just thinking about like how to make art spaces more human in the ways that domestic spaces are. They're there for our comfort, for our, for our biological needs, but also our social and our emotional needs. And I wanted the gallery space to kind of reflect that.
Thank you. Wow. I'm learning so much right now and being able to speak to you all for just a few minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing your work through For Space, and
Yeah.
thank you for that. Really, I'm now going to associate you with the numbers 3 and 6 forever.
That's okay. I'm also like the circle girl. So yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Cheers. Hi. Hi, Scott.
Hi there.
Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about your project here?
Sure. My name is Scott Deeming. I'm a doctoral candidate in the Indie program here at Concordia, and I'm also an independent toy maker and zine maker, and I go by the name Yoyodyne Toy Division. That's my sort of making moniker, and this is a collection of the work that I brought for the show. So it's all handmade and hand painted in resin, which is essentially 2-part liquid plastic. So you make a toy usually using parts of other toys in a process called kit bashing, which is derived from like the Hollywood special effects industry, where they used to take bits and pieces from different model kits to like make spaceships or moon bases or whatever, mostly science fiction. In this case, the kits that you are bashing are individual action figures that sort of get disassembled, rearranged in new forms, and then made into, and then silicone molds are made, and then those molds are used to cast these resin toys. So, yeah.
And I see that because you've included the years here, we're seeing 2019, a lot of 2023, 2022. I wonder if, do you want to speak at all to the trajectory of your process or development as you've worked with this?
For me, I've always been like very into pop culture, and my doctoral research is in transmedia studies, and toys are a medium in that sort of network of other media forms. And I've always been a collector. And then in 2017, I was actually diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I had been sort of following toy customizers online. And it was one of the ways that sort of brought me to a path of healing was starting to make toys in that way. And it reconnected me to my grandfather and his hobby practices using white metals and making his own military figurines and hobby railroading. And so 30 plus years after he passed away, I sort of engaged in a practice to deal with my own trauma in the same way that he did from the war. And then it just sort of became integrated into my everyday practice. And this is actually a more random selection of my work, I think, because it's what I had at home. But some of them, for me, I think the action figure is a really interesting form because it's kind of it's sort of situated somewhere in found material for me. There's a ready-made quality to it. So that's why I hand sculpted Duchamp's urinal piece and then turned it into R2-D2 using R2-D2 legs. So there's a kind of a ready-made quality to that. And this idea of like, where do toys intersect with art practice and how can we think about it? So one of the things that I did, one of the projects that I started during the pandemic was I made a custom Marina Abramovich figure and I made a little gallery, and then it's a photo project that lives on Instagram where I recreated her performance from 2012 at the MoMA using my own action figure collection, sitting in the chairs opposite her. So it's called The Artist is Playset because it's a playset. So playing around with that, like the kind of these questions of artistic legitimization in emergent media, because toys increasingly through the designer toy scene and the art toy scene have been butting up against, the same kind of moral panics that other media go through. So there's sometimes it's just I get an idea and I just want to put some pieces together. And sometimes I'll do a deeper dive and ask deeper questions. Most of it I would say is rooted somewhere within like the ethos of the mashup or pastiche. It's always kind of referring to another facet of culture. It generally doesn't sit distinct from itself. Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much. And interesting how the kind of intergenerational practice has come up time and again with the folks you've spoken to in here and during the panel.
I think that's part of the legacy of craft. Even if the material changes to plastic, in the case that it has with me, the dominant media of my materials in my grandfather's time were woods and metals, and the dominant material of my youth was plastic. And growing up in the 1980s and dealing with all of the rise of the action figure as like sort of a platform for conveying character from other media forms and stuff. So plastic makes a lot of sense as the next step in that. And especially now with makers engaging with things like stereolithography, 3D printing as well, like the economies of scale have gotten to the point where we can work digitally and output in plastic like in a very short order too. It's really sort of fascinating and interesting to me.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
No
Thank
problem.
you for your time and for that wonderful walkthrough of your project. So I think we're nearing the end here, folks. I don't know if Michelle is here or Sabina. These are people I haven't met personally, so I'm calling out names now.
And I'm right here checking my phone.
Okay. Can I hand you a microphone and you introduce yourself and speak to your project?
I am wearing a mask. Do you want me to take the mask off?
We can hear you. It's
Okay,
more
you can
for
hear
the
me? That's
visuals.
fine.
Whatever is comfortable for you.
Thank you. So my project is, I'm sort of an imposter because everybody's making beautiful things and I'm undoing things. It's actually a project that I developed following the passing of my mother-in-law. I don't know where I'm looking at everybody, who was a knitter, and she used to knit sweaters that she would wear. Some of them she would gift, but mostly for herself. So it was an incredibly personal practice. And once she passed away, she left a mountain of sweaters that we didn't know what to do with them.
So I took one of them and I figured I will recycle the material. I'll undo it and recycle it. But funny thing is that undoing craft is actually more complicated than doing craft. The logic of it escaped me. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to follow her making. And it all became a metaphor of dealing with grief. And I'm a printmaker. I'm doing an MFA in print media at the moment. So I was struck by how, well, first of all, to finish the undoing, I was trying to have a continuous thread that we had to constantly cut. So these are cuts of the process. And I was struck how the material actually holds scent of the person and how it held the perfume that she wore. And I had some old cosmetics. So I decided to print the sweater on just any paper I had with, fond de teint and makeup and anything that I had on hand, sort of mimicking the traces of the person on the knitting. And it's all a process. I did not want to make beautiful things. I just wanted a trace of the process. And all this was actually pieces of performances that I made for my MFA projects, and they live on Instagram at the moment. I'll get out of the way, yeah.
Thank you, Sabina. That's really quite beautiful. I've got to say, as a space dedicated to looking at or examining research in progress, in development, in process, and what does that look like? Like, we're very interested in bringing projects through the force space as they are, in fact, in development, so that we can speak to folks about the challenges, the questions, the ideas that are coming up for them collectively or as individuals. And so we really appreciate this. I think it's funny that you called yourself an imposter at the start. Not at all, I think this is really great, and thank you for being the backdrop here to our panel area. Is there anything else you wanted to say? Or how can we see the project on Instagram? Do you want to
just on my account, if you scroll down it's become sort of a repository of performances and of pieces. The only thing I want to say is that I never completely undid the knitting. It's now dirty. I had also a series of performances of watching the washing machine, sort of try to remove the traces, which actually never happened because cosmetics are incredibly powerful chemicals that leave their trace on matter. And I never finished it. I just ended up putting it in a bag away, and eventually, hopefully in a while, I'll take it out again and see what I can do with it. And so the in progress, it's actually, it's exactly how this is described. It's always in progress.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I will see if there's anybody here. Maybe Celia, since we're by your work. I'm seeing Celia here. If she's willing to come and speak to us about the project. Yeah. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you'd like to. Sorry. If you wanted to introduce yourself and speak to us about your project or the collective, you're more than welcome to.
There are some other people in my group
that we'll invite them.
We can invite them. Rochelle, Gabby, do you want to be and talk to us? So yes, we are a group of ceramic artists and potters, and we are displaying ceramic. And our group's called Pro Unique. And basically we have been, the objective of our project was to get out of isolation while we were in lockdown during the
2021, February.
when everybody was in the winter, it was cold, everybody's isolated. And so what we used to do to start was like, we actually just had some Zoom meetings where we're talking to each other.
Yeah, we discovered Zoom.
We discovered Zoom,
For our group.
So we started like having little chats, and it was just to talk about ceramics because we couldn't do it because everything was closed. We didn't have access. We couldn't.
And we
couldn't go to our
couldn't bounce
studios.
ideas off each other.
Yeah,
because
so-
that's what you do in the studio, right? You get to talk to everybody, say, oh, what do you think this is going? Is that looking good? Should I do this? Should I do that? And suddenly you're alone, which is great because you're very productive. But sometimes it's hard because suddenly you're alone, where before you have a whole community.
Yeah. And then one of our friends.
Yes, then we spoke about starting a project.
Exactly.
And Rehan wrote a directive and came up with a title. And then we decided how we'll produce it. And me and
me, the two of us started with
we started with February, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So me and Celia started in February, and as you can see, ours is a bit darker than the others. Yes.
Yeah. So this one is really like, I was inspired by the poem that you had seen on the screen. It's a poem about humanity and how humans should help each other. And then I was sort of influenced by what I was seeing on TV, what I was seeing on social media, and how we were reacting at the time to COVID and to the whole situation. So the feeling that there was a percentage of the population of the planet who was sort of, sheltered, and then the rest of the population was sort of in a chaos. And there was this sort of mass hysteria. And, I guess a little bit February was helping with that too. So the whole thing ended up like this. I don't know if I can really explain it. I think it needs to be looked at and felt and in the context, but I call it the 1%. And I felt, there was a lot of talk about, for example, the African the African continent, not planet, African continent versus, the Western countries, and everybody was saying, oh my God, how COVID was going to hit the African continent because they didn't have all the necessary equipment and medication and everything. And as it turned out, actually, West Africa ended up not so bad. So there was all of that news that was, creating this anxiety and all these people who are making these decisions for most of us. So it's sort of part of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So maybe we should go.
Yeah, we should
who was
continue.
next?
Well, I think maybe we should talk about your piece because you're here. Because we had two pieces that were
in February. So I'm over there,
Yeah,
but there's
so
people
I don't know if
there,
you have
but,
enough time to see all of that at the same time. It's like we're like.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
So I was also in February. So also I was feeling very dark. And we were worried about what does it mean as what is it going to mean to everybody, not just us in Canada where we're protected and we have all the means to survive. And I think that's why I came with my idea of Together Apart with different modules. And I got inspired by, I was thinking about second burial as inspiration for my pieces in the beginning. And as time progressed, I decided, no, I'm going to laugh at everything and I'm going to use humor. And what I drew on my pieces was just more about mocking our experience, basically, and about what we were seeing all the time. And we felt very much that we were being fed all the time bad news and never getting anything good out there. But yes, it was February and dark and depressing not to be able to work, That's why I think a lot of us also did many small pieces because we weren't able to work continuously on our work. So I think even Celia, in her work, if you see, there is a lot of the little people and a lot of the skulls.
you did them slowly, right?
Yes,
Because
yes.
you couldn't work at once on a big
Yeah,
piece. And
yeah.
for me, it was a big departure because I usually make large pieces, but I was not able to do that because of time and the material we were using.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the process that we had come up with
Yes.
was because we didn't have the equipment and materials that we needed. So it was mainly to work at home or to work in our garage
Yes.
or to work in our
Celia.
garden. So
Not
depending
in
on
February.
so depending on
No.
the person, they were
Yeah.
working. They were finding their own way to
To
do
work,
their
yeah,
work.
yeah.
And then there was the firing, as you know, like when you're doing ceramics, you have to fire several times. There's the bisking, and then there's the glazing. So that's two firings. So we
Yeah.
had to find a way to transport everything without touching anybody, without
Yeah.
being in the same space than the other person. So it
Yeah.
was a process that really brought us all together and helped us to be, like a group of friends who are sharing.
And something to think about, and how will
exactly.
you present it to the next person, because
Yeah.
we weren't allowed to speak about things between ourselves because we wanted each person to interpret the work that came before, to have their own interpretation. So it was very interesting conversations, because I spoke to Celia because we weren't on the same group, so we were allowed to speak. And to the next person, we spoke about personal things, really, not about the work. We just sent photos of the work and had to listen to what they think, because Rochelle, that is right here, was after me. So come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I also speak because not everybody's here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Also kind of placement.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to maybe
Go
you start
ahead,
with? So, well, the way we had it was it started with the poem. Then Gabi was inspired by the poem, and she was with that inspiration started this piece. Then the second piece was, I believe, Rochelle. So she started from this piece. That was the next piece she was working with.
Yeah.
And she
Rochelle
was
doesn't want
inspired
to
from
talk,
Rochelle, and
but-
maybe you want to.
But
I don't
Rochelle
know.
was very sweet and decided that my very negative thought in the beginning is inspiring and it's healing huts. Yeah, go ahead.
So I had seen Gabby's piece, and of course, she didn't tell me what her intentions were. We just knew the theme was togetherness, and I looked at it for a while, and I saw that she wrote "together, apart, together." And that made me think of a video I had received just a week prior to seeing Gabby's project. And the video was sent to me by a friend who was alone in Florida during the pandemic. She had been in the States in Florida and decided just to stay there by herself. And she sent me a little video of people at the beach participating in a drum circle. So people were dancing, they were apart, they were keeping their 2 meters apart, and there were people also on the drum. So it made me think of a drum circle, and people are together but apart. So I made a djembe drum, and I made people dancing. But what I wanted to do, I wanted to make sure everything that I made would be able to be used again after our exhibition was over. So I've made it so that you can put a candle in the top, you can put a candle in the body of the drum, and the people dancing on the cylinders can also be reused either for flowers or for utensils. So I like the idea that it won't be in a room locked away, that people will actually be able to use it. Anyways, I got this idea from Gabby's project and her statement, "Together but apart."
And then it went to, and you passed it to Saba.
And Saba, she looked at my project and then made her project, which she called Vessels of Change. And she, I guess it would be best if
Terry
she
will
was
be
here
next.
right now. But
it was about the water source that is feeding everybody, and there is all the different
again,
people
together but apart,
yeah.
that we're somehow still working together.
So maybe maybe
Hi,
just say after that, we had Terry, who was inspired by Saba's piece.
We planned all this at the end of January and February, but I wanted to be at the end of our group of 4. I wanted to have an opportunity to make this in my backyard. So I was inspired by Saba's piece. I loved the use of spouts, and the spouts nourishing in my imagination, the small cups that you put under each spout. So I had the idea of making taller cylinders that would have spouts that would nourish the smaller pieces. And in the past, I've made tall mugs with that hemp design motif. And I decided this time to make 4 cylinders with spouts on the taller ones, feeding into the smaller ones. And when I was finished, it turned out that because the clay is speckled and the glaze was clear, they look like birch trees. And that made me very happy. I wasn't really planning to make them look like birch trees, but with the hemp motif and the birch trees, it looked very organic. I was very happy with that. And I also want to mention that as part of this motif of togetherness, we really helped each other. I didn't have access to a kiln or glazes, and Celia and Gabby helped me fire my pieces and glaze my pieces. So this theme of togetherness, I almost get teary when I think about it, because it was a rough period. We were all very isolated. And so the project, it's the first group project I ever took part in. I think it was a wonderful project. Rehan is the one who thought of it and got us going. And the inspiration of each piece on each person, the way it was done, was very inspiring and very moving. It was a great project to be part of, and I'm very glad I took part.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have 2 people who are not here. So Rehan's piece here. So this one was inspired by my piece. Maybe I can give you you can help me with this. Okay. So Rehan's piece is inspired by mine. So she called hers 100 equals 1. So based on the fact that my piece was called 100%, the 1%. So her work is really like showing the fragility of humanity, of universes versus each other. And despite the imperfection and vulnerability of each of us, how we are able to connect and be connected to each other. So that's her piece. I mean, I'm speaking for her. I wish she was here to be able to explain it herself. Yeah. And the last piece is from Pauline, which is on the other side. And that one is also inspired by Rehan's piece. And hers is more joyful. She did it in the spring.
April.
Yeah, it was in the April, May. It was in the spring. Do you want to maybe talk about it?
I can, yeah, for sure. So Pauline was looking at the balls of Rehan and decided that they're seeds, and she's going to make flowers and vases and bend the flowers because they're nourishing each other. And what we saw that was very interesting is the color blue appeared in a lot of the work, and that's it. And I think it's a beautiful set of bottles together with a lot of interesting glazes. And I don't know, I think she was just wanting to express the joyfulness of getting out of being outside.
Of the winter. Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing I want to add is that our group is very diverse. I mean, we are all women. That's what combines us. And I think the love of ceramics has brought us together. Yeah. We're not all artists of academic type of artists. Everybody is doing their type of work, their creation, their personal creation. And so that diversity really helped us to create what we did. We also have very different cultural backgrounds. There are people who are from Iranian backgrounds. There are people from Israeli backgrounds. There are people from Canadian backgrounds. There are people from African backgrounds and German backgrounds. So we have a combination of people with very different, cultural portraits, let's call it that way, and also different ages. You know, so the youngest person, I think she's in her early 30s.
Yes, that's Saba. Saba is younger,
Exactly,
yeah.
and I think the oldest I'm not going to say, but she's a little older. So we had like you know, a combination of very different experiences that were put together, brought together.
And very different skill sets.
And very different skill sets too. That's true. Yeah, like, exactly.
And inspiration.
And
what
inspiration.
we usually work
Yeah,
on is very
yeah,
different.
exactly. Yeah. Voilà, that's us. Yeah, the Puinique.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. We really appreciated this tour, and thank you for speaking on behalf of your kind of collaborators. We hope that many more collaborations are to come from this dark moment until exactly. All right. Well, I don't know, Doug, if we have anybody else here able to speak to us to the final few projects. Maybe we'll just zoom on over. Or maybe not. Do we still have folks online?
Yes, I have a few questions that I put on the chat.
You have a few questions?
I wrote them on the chat.
Oh, you wrote questions in the chat. I'm so sorry, Rosa.
No problem.
My computer actually died, and so I haven't been looking at it, but I'll try to read the questions on another computer here, and maybe we can see if the folks are available to speak to you.
It's mainly about social media of the artists.
Okay, so you had asked about Sabina's Instagram. I believe she's, and Scott's Instagram as well. We can certainly have the organizers share all of that information with you. We're going to write a follow-up email to the events and perhaps share resources in there. But typically, you'd probably be able to find them with their names, I think, just their full names. That's what Sabina had mentioned. So I think Sabina's last name is Rak, R-A-K. And I believe you'd be able to find her on Instagram. And we can ask Scott as well, last name Deeming, I believe. I can go over and have a look, but we'll certainly get that info to you.
Yeah, that's great. And I also wanted to, well, thank you for doing this Zoom showcase or whatever it's called, the tour. It was great to see this work.
Wonderful. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you, Rosa, for staying with us all this time and for sharing your work during the panel conversation as well.
Of course.
We're going to sign off on the Zoom and the live stream now. We appreciate you allowing us to take you on this impromptu tour of the space here today. So until next time, bye everybody.
Bye, thank you.